Hi, everyone, and welcome back to a 20 something survival guide where you and me learn to survive and thrive in our 20s. I'm Darian Alexis, and today we're shedding light on invisible disabilities, which, according to harvard.edu, only 10% of Americans have. I'm joined by Maddie Kelly, our special guest today, who's a fellow 20 something acupuncture student living in California with fibromyalgia.
Yeah, hi, I'm Maddie Kelly. I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Maryland, but I moved out to California to start my acupuncture degree. I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia officially a year ago. I went through a lot with the diagnosis, but yeah, I've been living with it and I think I'm doing a pretty good job. Acupuncture's been really great for me. I'm excited to be here and talk about it.
That's awesome. So, before we get into things, I did want to define invisible disabilities for everyone, just in case it's something that people don't have a familiarity with. So, an invisible disability is just what you think it is. It's a physical, mental, or neurological condition that is not visible from the outside. So, it can limit things like a person's movements, senses, or activities. And according to the CDC, diabetes, chronic pain, mental illness, chronic fatigue, stomach issues, and infertility are some of the most common invisible disabilities. And so the general public doesn't necessarily always recognize these things, which can be extremely frustrating to the people that have them. Because as I mentioned, 10% of people in the US have them, and 10% may seem small, but when you really break down how many people there are in the world, it's pretty big. So, the first question I wanted to ask you is why do you think that these types of things are often overlooked by society?
I think I actually studied this a little bit. I was a neurobiology major with the psych undergrad, and I looked into more of the mental and learning disabilities, which can also be invisible for some people. And a lot of it is diagnosis. Diagnosis is really hard, especially when you have these disorders that share symptomology from just different systems of the body.
Mm,
Because you're not going to just one doctor, you have to go to a bunch, and they're not putting those pieces together. It takes a while, especially for people who are relatively healthy or don't appear to struggle. If blood work doesn't come back super concerning, it's hard. Diagnosis makes it really hard. The longer people struggle with these disorders, the better they get at
mm-hmm,
surviving with them and
mm-hmm,
hiding them.
mm-hmm.
And so people aren't seeing them. They're not going to doctors because they're fed up. They've been, let down. It's a hard diagnosis. And I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons.
I relate to every single thing you said. I want to hop into our journeys more. You've only had your diagnosis for 1 year, so I can only imagine how hard it was for you prior to that. And now that you have it, it might be a little bit easy moving forward. But for me, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, which is very, very uncommon when I was 16 years old because everyone's like, is
Hmm.
it juvenile? Is it this? Is it that? And I'm like, no. And I had it prior to being 16, but no one could figure it out. My blood work was coming back funky, and eventually I finally saw rheumatologist that was able to put it together. But these things go so unseen and so unhidden. And when you are healthy looking on the outside, it makes it that much harder. So, can you hop into and tell us a little bit about what your journey was like before diagnosis and kind of how everything came to fruition?
Yeah, of course. So I was really active as a kid. I cheered, I played lacrosse. I was always running around with like friends and stuff, running, going to the gym on my own. Um, I was always prone to breaking my bones and tearing ligaments. That was just something, we always chalked up to luck or not drinking enough milk growing up. Um, but I'd say around like 14, 15, when I got into high school, started having really bad bouts of chronic fatigue. Like I slept all day, every day in classes, teachers would yell at me. And it wasn't that I wasn't paying attention or like I could not stay awake. I was
Yeah.
chronically borderline anemic, like not full blown iron deficiency, but they were just right there. And I had like all the signs, like the out of breath, doing minimal things. But I still did my sports and I just, you know, would say, oh, I'm sick or I caught a cold. And I had this horrible joint pain. But again, I was always injuring things. So tendonitis was thrown around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I was older, maybe like my junior year of high school was when it started getting like pretty bad. I had to quit all my sports, couldn't do anything. It was affecting like my studying. I had a little bit of brain fog. I was noticing I wasn't retaining things as well. So I started seeking out diagnosis. I've been tested for lupus, RA, and Lyme's disease probably 10 times in my life. Every time it'd come back negative, they'd be like, this has got to be it. And then it
Every
wouldn't,
time. I
right?
yeah, I can totally relate to that. They're like, "It has to be this," and then you get the blood work back and it's not, and at this point, I just wanna know what my issue is. I need to figure this out. So relatable.
Right. And then I ended up having an injury around the same time that this was getting pretty bad in my shoulder. And they couldn't figure that out either. It ended up being thoracic outlet syndrome, which is another difficult thing to diagnose. So at this point, I was going to the doctor. I was missing so much school that even with like a really good GPA, they were worried I wasn't going to get into colleges because I was always in the doctor's office or at a physical therapy appointment or sleeping. But I just thought it was normal. I just thought it was like growing up. And then I got to college and I was like, okay, I'm sick of wasting my life in doctor's offices. So I just stopped looking for answers and just kind of sucked it up. I went to Penn State and the weather there got cold. So there were days where I like couldn't walk to class. It would take me like an extra 20
Yeah.
minutes because my joints would be so creaky and like my muscles would ache. Um, and then, fibromyalgia, it's a little odd where it affects multi-systems. So my immune system was compromised, and there would be days where I would be really swollen, and then there'd be
Mhm.
days where it would be like really hyperactive and like acne would flare up. It was just metabolically insane for me. And it was hard to like maintain good mental health while going through college and doing all that. So that was really tough. But when I graduated and I was hell bent on becoming a doctor,
Yeah, is that because of everything you went through?
yes, definitely. And towards the end, I was like sick of it. I shadowed an ER and it was such a good experience. And I was like blown away by the way that they could help people in emergency situations. And at this stark contrast to like the chronic situations, I was like, I can't live like this in this field. So I pivoted to naturopathic medicine and found an acupuncturist and started getting treatments from her. And that's how I ended up in school and how
Oh
I
my
started
gosh.
getting, yeah, it's how I started getting relief of symptoms. And I realized that I think my climate, and you might be able to attest to this, but like the cold, damp East Coast climate just settles in your joints.
Yeah.
I was getting tested for arthritis more and more because that was more presenting. And then I made the move out to California for the school I'm in. And I was like, oh, great. My pain will go away. I was so excited. And then I got here and the dryness, like the
Mhm.
pain changed, but it hit me like a brick. I was sick for like, I think like 3 months
Oh
to the point
no.
where like it like hurt to like lay down and it hurt to sit up. When you're in pain, your heart rate goes crazy. So I was having like heart palpitations all the time. And so I went to a doctor out here and finally they settled on a fibromyalgia diagnosis. And the first thing they did was offer me like an anticonvulsant, antidepressant, nerve blocker. And I was like, okay, this is going to be a long road because I'm not going to do that. But now that I know what I'm working with, I can do as much research as I can with the knowledge that I learned in undergrad and where I'm at now. Um, and yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am.
Thank you for sharing that and being so vulnerable. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what fibromyalgia is for people that may have no familiarity with it at all?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I can try my best. It's
Yeah, just we're not experts here. She's gonna be a doctor. She's not yet, but disclaimer to everyone, we're talking about our experiences in our 20s with these invisible disabilities. The tongue
yeah,
twister for me.
it's a hard one. So for me, and it manifests differently for everybody because some people will have more of the internal, like visceral symptoms. But for me, it's a lot of joint pain and a lot of those traditionally fibromyalgia is diagnosed by using like trigger point pain. There's like a map of the body that a doctor laid out where it's like, oh, if they're sore in these spots in the muscles. And I read a book, I actually have it. It's called What Your Doctor's Not May Not Tell You About Fibromyalgia. And it's a doctor who wrote like a symptom protocol. And it's got a lot of testimonies about other people with fibro and the different symptoms and stuff. And it's been helpful. I don't take it as like gospel. I do my own research, but it is like a helpful thing. This views fibromyalgia as the inability of your cells to clear out debris fast enough,
Okay.
leading to a buildup of basically byproduct toxins that gunks up kidney function. So, electrolyte out of balance, things like that. Then you're getting it stored in the muscles because that's the first place it's going to go. So that's where you're getting the pain from. And then the second place it's going to go is like to brain tissue. So that's where you get like the brain fog and everything. And then through the brain and gut connection, you get like GI symptoms. Some people have those more predominantly. It's basically just system overload inflammation. So it manifests in crazy ways, which makes it so hard to diagnose. Because for me, like I was getting really bad cystic acne, joint pain, and chronic fatigue. And those all seem separate. But if I've treated as one, I get better. So they're all there together. But
Gotcha. And so for
yeah.
fibromyalgia, it's not curable, correct?
No,
Like you
it's
can treat the symptoms, but you can't get rid of.
yeah, people
Okay.
mainly because they still don't know what's causing it. So the like byproduct buildup is just a theory, and it's a pretty good one. I think not a lot of people know what it is.
Yeah.
Lady Gaga is like a famous person who has suffered with fibromyalgia publicly, I believe.
Oh, I actually did not know that.
Yeah, I think it was like 10 years ago, was hospitalized mid-tour
Mm,
and came out about it. But other than that, like, yeah, it's a very uncommon thing to
yeah.
talk about and have.
No, that's crazy. And so that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it because I feel like a lot of these things, a lot of the more common invisible disabilities like diabetes and ADHD, things like that, are a little bit more common and more talked about. But I know that both RA and fibromyalgia are things that people might not be talking about and might not even know what it is and what it looks like. So for my journey, I was in high school and I had a lot of issues. I don't know how else to say it, but a lot of
Hmm.
similar things that you were saying, but the kind of thing that was the cherry on top and what sold the deal was at one point my hands were stuck. And I will say to this day, I am so grateful for my diagnosis and being able to get treatment for it to help slow down RA because just like fibromyalgia, once you have RA, you can't cure it. You can just treat the symptoms and slow down the progress of the joint issues, if you will.
Hmm.
So my hands used to be stuck like this. I could barely hold a pencil. I was in show choir. I could barely put a bracelet on because we had
Uh,
bangles. So it was really difficult. And it's something that I didn't want to talk about with anyone. In fact, I think the only person that knew was my mom and my best friend because I would vent to her all the time, Marissa. Shout out to Marissa. But my other best friend, like Kelsey, I hung out with her this weekend and I realized I didn't even tell her till years later because I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but I didn't want to come off as a complainer. I didn't want to come off as like a victim. And
hmm.
so I kind of kept it a secret and didn't talk about it because I didn't want to be different. And I think the older I get, the more I embrace being different and knowing that it's okay and being okay with being seen because I feel like even still to this day, I think people think that I'm dramatic a lot of times because there are some days that I can do everything and there's some days I can do nothing. So I lean on my partner a lot because there's days where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm so strong picking up these weights. And there's other days where I cannot open a pickle jar. I cannot even like flick the lid to my water bottle. So it really
Hmm.
just depends on the day. And so I think that it's really important to have a support system. But that just goes without saying. So, do you have flares? And so, for anyone that doesn't know, flares are what I consider to be the times where it's just opposite of like the kind of remission. So it's like when the swelling's really bad, the pain is really bad, the fatigue is really bad. And so, as you can see, I have more publicly started wearing my compression brace, which I have never worn before. In fact, I just bought one. I used to sleep with a heavy duty one every night, so only my boyfriend knew. But now I'm like, I'm done. I'm just showing it off to the world. So I only wear it on the days that I need it. And for some reason, my left hand is worse than my right hand. But do you get these flares too? And how do you deal with those?
I do. The flares are a new concept to me because prior to my diagnosis last year, I just thought I had chronic pain. So I would say now that I know what they are, I can call it a flare properly.
Mm-hmm.
I've had flares that have lasted 2 weeks to 3 months, and they're really tough because you don't want to come across like a complainer. Like when somebody's
Yeah.
sick, if it's an acute sickness, they have a little stomach flu or cold, they can cry about it for like 2 days and it's kind of cute and you're like, oh, let me bring you soup, and then it's
Yeah.
over, right? But
Yeah.
when it's something you have to deal with day in, day out, people get fed up, whether they want to say it or not. You can see it in their eyes. And also, like, it weighs heavy to complain. Like, it doesn't feel good complaining.
Yeah.
It also doesn't feel good to not feel good. So it's a weird balance. But for me, I've just been practicing learning what helps. I think I've recently found a routine. I moved over New Year's. I don't know if it was like the activity of moving or everything and starting school back up, or just stress and everything, but I ended up having a flare and it lasted me about a month. And my biggest focus was doing less to do more. So like instead of trying to like get better so I could run, I would get better so I could go for a walk. And like instead of trying to do all these things at once, break it up and do little bits, in lifestyle things. And then I work with a nutritionist. And then I do a lot of sauna
Mm.
based stuff right now, and I've found that helps a lot. But acupuncture is like my biggest. Like if I feel a flare coming on, I make an appointment, I go see someone,
Can
and
you
I
talk
start
a little
working on
bit
it.
more about that? Because I have never done acupuncture in my life. I think it's the thing where you put the little needles in
It
you,
is.
but I have no idea what it is. It's what you're studying. Tell the listeners what it is and how it can help people.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is my favorite thing. So acupuncture is ancient Chinese medicine, and there's different lineages and different styles, and it's evolved. But we study still from the classics, like Ling Shu, Su Wen, Han Dynasty level things. And it's the use of meridian therapy. So these channels that flow through your body and through your organs, they carry your chi, which I don't know if you heard of chi. I feel like that's the one term that gets thrown out there. Chi is what acupuncture treats. We treat chi disorders. So in theory, how I've always viewed it is if you see an acupuncturist and you start having like vague symptoms that haven't manifested as a biomedical disorder yet,
Hmm.
they can pick that up in the pulse, in the tongue, and through a list of questions based on how we view the body and the meridian system. And we can treat accordingly so that the chi disorder does not progress into a full-blown blood-based disorder or tissue disorder that can be picked up on a biomedical scan or something. I focus on spiritual acupuncture, which treats more of the spirit as the root cause of disease in the chi, and then overall functional medicine, which is working at like viewing the organ systems and the mind and the body and the nutrition and the lifestyle and the supplements and all the external factors and how they're affecting you and how you're affecting them and treating through that. But yeah, it's just the use of needles on the meridians is the
It's
simple way.
literally so interesting. And for those of you that do have an invisible disability, those of you that don't, I cannot talk enough about the power of different foods and supplements and these external things. Like when I first was diagnosed, thank you again to my doctor. I was on a very, very heavy medication. It was called methotrexate,
Mm-hmm.
and methotrexate is a very, very low dose of chemo. I had to carry around a sharps container because I had to inject
Mm-hmm.
myself, and that was extremely traumatic for me personally, especially because the liquid that I had to use to treat myself was highlighter yellow. And so whenever I would see a highlighter when I was in high school, I would just get sick to my stomach because I was thinking about it. And so eventually, after about a year or two about of being on that, I said, this is no longer for me. I need to turn to something more natural. So I decided to take things into my own hands, and I would see, more naturopathic doctors. So ever since then, I have been able to manage things a lot better than I did before. But it just goes to show you that if you do have the diagnosis, you can kind of decide how you want to treat things. So you were talking about how you see a nutritionist. How has the nutritionist helped play out your invisible disability and make things like better? Can you talk about how food is fueling you?
Yes, absolutely. So food was always something that I like didn't find helpful. I didn't have the like it was a lot of work to eat when I was extremely fatigued and in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some people tend to eat for like emotional pain, that, the whole tub of ice cream when you're sad type deal. But when you're in physical pain, sometimes it's the last thing you want to do. Never thought about that when I was younger. But then in my acupuncture schooling, met a naturopathic doctor who is incredibly intelligent, and she was telling me her journey of healing other issues through nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a really good nutrition teacher as well. So I found a naturopathic or functional nutritionist is what they're called, out here in California. The first thing we did was look at my blood work, and they look at it at a different range than other doctors would. Basic vitamins, iron, vitamin D, vitamin A, like all those things. Got those straight. And then once that was there, looked at the microbiome. Bacteria in your gut plays a huge role in inflammation. So we looked at that. I cut out gluten and dairy for a
Mm.
year. I still don't do gluten. I've been slowly reintroducing dairy into my
I love
system because
cheese.
it was hard,
It's,
but
yeah.
um, it helped a lot. So
Yeah.
gluten, I think a lot of people have a gluten intolerance or inflammation process, if you will, and a lot of people choose not to do gluten these days. The way gluten's processed in the body, you have to open the gap junctions to get the protein, and it leads to leaky gut syndrome, is what they call it, where they stay open too long and larger ions get into your bloodstream, leading to inflammation. Even if you're not allergic to gluten, this can be a process if your bacteria isn't, where it should be. So I cut out gluten, and I did see like a significant change immediately in the brain fog. I would say within
Mm-hmm.
a week or two. The pain was slow, but it stopped. And then once I was out of that initial highly inflamed state, we started working in more supplements like MSM and fish oils and corbiconol and all these other like anti-inflammatory joint supportive vitamins. Diet wise, we've worked on like more whole foods. I've reduced histamines. I love strawberries and red fruit, but they are higher in histamine. And I never noticed how much I sneezed after eating strawberries until I stopped eating strawberries.
What?
Um, right? So now when I eat them, I like sneeze a little bit and then I can feel a little achy. I would say learning how to use food as fuel, as you said, and even when I'm in pain and if I'm really tired and I'm not being active, taking that as my body needing more, not needing
Mm-hmm.
less, has been huge. So if I'm in pain now, I'm like, something's deficient, something needs, to be fed. So then bone broth, real protein, vegetables, whatever I can get that makes me feel better. Yeah, it's been really fun. My Instagram, I feel like, is all just foods that I make.
I appreciate it. I like seeing the foods. Whenever I can have fun with food, I think that's so important because I think so many of us really struggle with our food journeys and just our
Hmm.
relationship with food. So being able to have a healthier relationship with food and just love, the healthy stuff, I think is a great part of the journey.
Yeah, it's also, I will say, I've grown more connected to my environment, my community,
Mhm.
because like going to farmers markets, really paying attention to my food, what I'm making, and the byproducts of the plastics and everything like that that I'm not using so much anymore. So with acupuncture, I learn herbs, and some of the herbs are food therapy herbs. You see it on Instagram all the time, like the cinnamon
Yeah.
immunity or ginger immunity shots and adding cinnamon for this and that. Like these are Chinese herbs, and there's so many that we can cook with and stuff. It's just brought me closer to that like holistic lifestyle medicine.
Awesome. And so back before you were talking about how you have a roommate. Has your roommate helped you at all with these eating processes? And can you talk a little bit just about how important it is to have support systems when you have invisible disabilities?
Yes, yeah. Godsend is the best way to put it. Especially when somebody has similar struggles. There would be days where like I'd come home and be like, I just worked a 5-hour shift, not even that bad, and I had to leave because I can't stand anymore. And I'd just
Yeah.
sit there in a trance, and she would just come over and bring me an lollipop, not say a word, and leave me be. And I would do the same. Um, it's huge to be able to
Yeah.
talk about it, um, and not feel like you have to hide it because
Yeah.
it's already hidden and people don't see it. So you think you have to, push through, and it's the American culture, show up for work anyway. And having somebody who can tell you not to is great. Um,
No, definitely. Do you have any specific advice for those trying to seek support from friends and family?
I would say something I learned is accepting that you're not going to get it from everyone.
That's a good
Um,
one.
knowing where to go. Like I have my friends that I would die for. I
Yeah.
would not call them and be like, "I'm in pain, listen to me." A, they're not gonna know what to say. They're
Yeah.
not gonna understand, and just, like, knowing that and loving them anyway, and knowing that it's not their fault, they
Hmm.
just don't get it. And if you feel like there's no one that might get it, start with the person you feel most comfortable with, because even if they don't understand you, if you're comfortable with them, they'll see that and then they'll try. I have a friend back home who she's, like, one of my best friends. She moved out here with me, like, she, like, drove with me,
Aw,
um,
that's so
and
sweet.
went through that whole process with me, and she's the one person that doesn't have invisible disabilities, but would research if I asked her to, would research every corner she could to
Yeah.
understand and be able to, like, talk to me about it. I would just say find the people that, um, you think are capable of that,
Yeah.
and also being confident in your struggles. Like, that sounds weird because nobody wants to be struggling, but know that it's real. It's not fake. It's not in your
Yeah.
head. It's valid. You're allowed to be in pain. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to feel bad about it.
No, literally. That was exactly what I was going to say. I made a joke to my boyfriend the other day because I don't know what's been going on. I've had flares. Like, I have
Mhm.
not been able to be comfortable in my joints, specifically in my hands. And so he's like, "Oh, babe, it's going to go away." And I was like, "You know what? My pain is chronic, but I am iconic." And I'm like,
Yes, ma'am.
that is my new catchphrase. Because like the pain isn't really gonna go away, but I can learn to live with it more comfortably. And I think just being more vulnerable has been so
Mhm.
important for me, both like on my Instagram and with my friends and family. Like I was so nervous to post about it on my Instagram, but I did, and you slid up and some other people slid up. I've been struggling with this thing for over 10 years, and this is the first time where I feel like not alone, because
Yeah.
my parents have always been there, but to like extend the circle and just, opening up the conversation to invite others in has shown me that there is support systems out there. And even if you may have a friend or two that can't handle it, you will probably have friends, or you can find new friends that definitely can. Because this weekend when I was in New York City, I had a very heavy suitcase that I was dragging around the city. And I looked at my bestie and I said, I cannot do this. And she was carrying my bag all around New York City, up and down the stairs. I felt like a little princess. But there was like just moments where I physically, like, I couldn't. And
Yeah.
she could. And she was willing to help. And like I said before, my boyfriend, Michael, like, he is so supportive. And will just help me in any way that I need. And having a partner and having friends that can support you in the ways you need if you have more of a physical invisible disability is very important. So try to find those people. If you're looking for a way to make friends, check out my last podcast episode so you can learn how to make friends. But yeah, I think that's very special.
Yeah, definitely.
Living with chronic disabilities can be so exhausting emotionally. Can you talk about any of the coping mechanisms or self care practices that you have used to help navigate some of these ups and downs of your condition?
Yeah, I will say I had a really good therapist for 3 years.
Okay, good.
Shout out. He got me through the most. I think vulnerability was huge. You know, when you're in this physical pain that you have to constantly overcome,
Hmm.
it's like the mental game, you can't slip there either because, you know, if you let yourself get sad about it, then you're going to feel more pain.
Yeah.
Um, and then, like I was saying, the spiritual acupuncture that I am very interested in,
Hmm.
I just started flowing through that. I just, every time that something came up for me emotionally, I was like, okay, what is this telling me about how I'm interacting in the world, my body? Like, is this external? Is this internal? And thinking about it, I probably over intellectualize everything. I read a lot of medical books and things like that.
No, but that's so important because that's something I don't do. But that's why I have a support system because my
Yeah.
mom and my brother-in-law do, and they report back to me. But I like cannot bring myself to it because I just sometimes feel so fed up. I'm like, I don't want to read about it. I want to read about my little smutty fairies and my magical lands. I don't want to read about it. So I think it's so amazing that one of your self-care practices is just like taking everything into your own hands and figuring out how to help yourself.
Yeah, I think control is something that can be lacking a lot in these
Hmm.
kinds of disorders, especially when they take so long to diagnose. Like it feels like you're spiraling out of control of, you know, everything because you're at the doctor's office so much, your life starts to slip. It's can be stressful. I would say gaining that control through studying and stuff has been helpful. And also knowing when to let go of it because we can't fix everything and we won't fix everything, and that's okay. I do a lot of journaling, and then I'm a hobby girl. I really am.
We love a hobby girl. Oh my gosh, yes, you're crocheting. It's so awesome. I talk about it all the time on this podcast, I know. But hobbies are like so filling for your soul. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just things you can do in your spare time rather than chronically scrolling, rather than watching a ton of TV, which I guess TV technically could be a hobby. But like, put on this podcast, pull out your crochet needles, and just get to going.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. That and walks. I do a lot of podcast listening on my walks.
I love a
I
walk.
do less so that I can do more. Just go for a walk first thing in the morning. Get some fresh air. It doesn't have to be long. I process some things during that walk and then eat and start my day. If I'm stressed out, I don't push myself because if my mind's stressed and then I push myself, I'm doing things while I'm tense and my muscles listen to that and stay tense and then they don't relax and then I'm in a flare and I don't know why.
Yeah, I am very bad at resting, and resting is something that is also very important when you have joint issues.
Hmm.
I mean, it's very good to move. Low impact movement is very
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
So walking, like we were talking about, yoga, stretching, anything that is just not super high intensity, not a ton of weight. I don't know. I really need to get into that more zen because I just feel the zen energy coming from you. And I feel like I'm always so high energy. But I will say, because I am so high energy, it is very difficult for me to hide when I'm flaring or when I'm like
Hmm.
fatiguing because I'm like so high energy and then I'm just like quiet and like to myself. I think that that's one of the reasons why I've been so much more open lately, is because
Mm-hmm.
prior to living with my boyfriend, when I was like in those moments, I could kind of retreat to myself. And now he sees me and he thinks like I'm
Mm-hmm.
mad at him or something. And I have to be like, no, like I am just not
In it.
feeling well.
Yeah. No, 100%. Especially if you work with people or you go to school
Yeah.
and you have to, they expect you to show up 100%. And when you
Mhm.
show up and you're doing what your best, but you're like low energy, it's a lot of, oh, are you in a bad mood? What's wrong? Or, like more of that, like, why are you giving us this instead of, oh, how can I support you and lift you up in this moment,
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it feels like, I want to be there and I want to do what I can, but at the same time, like, please just let me do it in my own way.
Yeah,
Like,
and so that kind of leads me to my next question, which is like, in what ways do you think that society can be more inclusive and accessible for individuals with some of these invisible disabilities, both in physical spaces and just social interactions in general?
so I think I touched on this a little bit. I don't know if you saw for World Health Day, I did a little mini post. And one of the biggest things for me, and maybe this is just because I love school, it's like my thing. Education is huge. I think it's lack of information. And I don't mean like everybody needs to know exactly what it is or have to learn all the details down to the mitochondrial function of it. Knowing the basic definition of an invisible disability, um, and understanding what that might look like. 10% of people, almost everybody's going to know somebody who has one, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, and I would honestly say that I think that number is a lot higher. And I'm not sure if Harvard was like referring to something specific because we haven't even gotten into some of the other ones. One of the ones that wasn't mentioned a lot is fertility issues. And another
Mm-hmm.
thing that I think that I have is PCOS, which is
Mm-hmm.
polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is also an invisible thing that impacts many things in women's bodies. And so I think that that's not talked about a lot. Endometriosis.
Endometriosis.
Yes, thank you. That's another one that's like not talked about a lot, not super diagnosed for all women. So I
Mm-mm.
think that 10% has to be way higher.
Yeah. Um, Unfortunately, acupuncture, specifically in the United States, is often a last resort. So in our clinic, we do see a lot of those undiagnosed numbers
Oh, okay.
coming in. So I would agree with that. I think it is probably way higher. But I think education and fixing our health, like our healthcare, and I don't mean like insurance and all of that, because that's a whole nother thing, but like our basic understanding of how our bodies work, how nutrition should be viewed and
Hmm.
implemented, and from an early age, like the little food pyramid we used to learn, I can't. I think starting with the basics, because if you understand how a body's supposed to work and function when it doesn't, either in yourself or in somebody else, the empathy is going to be there and it's going to be stronger. Um, and at least that's how I view it.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think that starting with just like awareness and education and telling people is definitely the place to start. And that's why I wanted to record this podcast and why I was so
Hmm.
excited that you were willing to talk about it because I know so many people in my life aren't even aware. So at least if we can start with our little network, maybe the word can get out more and people can just spread more kindness and more empathy because you never know what someone's going through. You
Mm-mm.
never, even if you do know that they have a disability of some sort, whether it's visible or non-visible, you still don't know what each and every person goes through every single day. So
Yeah,
I think we can all be
especially,
kinder to one another.
exactly. And especially like as women, I'm sure men have it tough too, but like as women, these things show up for us, like especially if it involves hormones, through acne, through weight fluctuations and
Yeah.
mood. And it's so hard to be in a bad mood as a woman.
Yeah.
It's not allowed. So I think just like education, how these processes and these basic health things work, huge.
Yeah,
Hopefully changing stigma around all of that.
no, definitely. Like when you put out the part about being a woman, I agree. I think it's probably equally as hard for men, but something that I've dealt a lot with based on mine has been just like the bloat and the weight gain. And
Mm-hmm.
that as a growing girl, a growing teen, was so hard.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I don't know if you had a similar experience with that at all, but that was something that like really, really was difficult for me. And I felt like I struggled with my confidence a lot in the past because of that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was hard for me to eat when I was in pain, so I went kind of the other way. But
Mm.
still, people feel the need to comment on bodies
No matter what.
no matter what. It's so bad this day and age. Like, if you're in a flare, you can't do what you normally do.
Hmm.
So there is things, and if it affects your hormones, that's going to affect other things. For me, like, the cystic was really hard.
Hmm.
Like, not only do people see it and you're embarrassed by it and you think it looks bad, it's painful and it's on your face and it's like, so definitely it's a struggle,
Yeah.
but we're not alone. And
We're not.
also, these bodies, like, they're just vessels for little spirits to run around and play. So they're going to change forever.
That,
And that's how I've come to terms with it.
that is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm like still slowly coming to terms with it, but you're right. We're just little vessels. We are growing and changing every day. Just be kind, people, or I swear I'm coming at you.
Yeah.
Kidding. So you've kind of talked about your journey and some of the things you've been through. Is there like one piece of advice that you may have for young adults that may be living with an invisible disability or even just for someone that might be supporting them?
Yeah, I would say my biggest thing is want better for yourself if
Hmm.
you can. Because, and I know a lot of people with RA, unfortunately, and even lupus. I grew up oddly in a town with the highest percentage of lupus in the States.
Wow. I wonder if
But
it's
no,
environmentally impacted.
I think about it often. That's why I was tested for lupus so often.
That's so
But I would say want better for yourself. Don't settle because it's hard, because it is hard and it is exhausting and it takes a while to get answers, but you deserve health and happiness and you can get there, whatever that may. It might not look like 100%. It might look like flare-ups, but you can reduce them. You can learn to manage and what you need when you're like going through a flare-up. So just don't stop pushing. And if somebody tells you something you don't like, trust your gut instinct because it's your body.
Yes, major snaps there. So many
Yeah.
major snaps there. I couldn't agree more because for me, like with my journey, people kept being like, "You're fine, you're young, you're healthy," and it wasn't till my mom put her foot down and was like, "My daughter is not okay." My mom really advocated for me and took me to so many different doctors, so many different specialists that we were able to connect the dots. So I agree. Stand up for yourself always. Do the research you have to do, but I do want to know, I do want to caution, do not self diagnose
Yes.
because there are so many things that are very similar, have similar symptoms. And I think a lot of people are self diagnosing these days just by listening to podcasts, being on TikTok. We're getting such an abundance of information all the time that you really want to make sure you're getting accurate information and not
Hmm.
trying to self diagnose there. So that's just my little
Yes.
caution to everyone listening.
100%. And also with like self-treating, like taking how I've done it, taking the holistic route and how it sounds like you've approached it.
Yeah.
I still work with professionals who have been schooled and, like,
Yeah,
these people study intensely and work with it a lot.
for sure. How can we advocate to support individuals that may have some disabilities?
I decided to just step back and be happy in my life and touch the people around me. So I think starting small, like talking to your friends, talking to strangers that you meet, like if I am talking to someone and they mention to me like chronic pain and they're open to a conversation, I'm asking them questions. I'm telling them stories that have helped me, people that I know. I'm just getting the conversation going
Yeah.
because I think, like obviously social media is incredible what you can do with it now. And I think
Hmm.
I love what you do. It's so fun to
Yeah,
see.
thank you.
And your podcasts are great. And I'm so happy to be here. And I think, we are able to reach more people than what we see in our daily lives. But I think starting in your community and in your environment, like even with your friends, your family, um, it's a great place to start.
Yeah, 1,000%. I agree with everything you said. Start small. Share this podcast episode on your story. Even if you don't want to share it on your story, share with a friend. You don't even have to share this podcast. Go find some resources about RA or fibromyalgia. Share that on your story. But if you're still tuned
Hmm.
in, just starting the conversation with someone. And, you know, we may not be able to touch everyone's lives, but even if we are able to help one person, then that's amazing. Hence why I started this
Yes,
podcast. I was like, if I can change one person's life, then that's what I'm here for. If this conversation that we are talking about sparks something in you to go see a doctor for something you may be struggling with, then I'm glad you're listening. I'm glad you're tuned in, and I hope you can find the help that you need.
100%. I think one thing I can't talk enough about is like the owning and the confidence of an invisible disability because that's a lot to overcome no
Yeah.
matter where you lie. If you're super confident and social all the time, or if you're super not. And I can't say enough about acupuncture helping me, but that's kind of a plug for myself. So
No,
the
please
field is
plug
great.
yourself. I want to learn more about it. Truly. People
Yeah,
have mentioned it to me before, and it's something that I'm just super not educated on. So I'm so glad we got to sit down and talk about it. And I'm definitely going to look into it because I didn't even realize that that could be something that could help with my pain, I guess. I don't know what I thought it
yeah.
was for because I knew that it was like the little thing with the needles, but that's I knew.
If my first acupuncture appointment was for the anemia and the chronic fatigue that I had, I thought it was only for pain. So I put on my intake forms. My doctor was like, "Oh, it looks like you also have like this anemia problem and this chronic fatigue." And I was like, "Well, yeah." And she's like, "Would you want to work on that?" And I was like, "You can do that? Please."
Did you feel an emotional release when you get acupuncture? Like, does it make you cry?
Okay, well, I'm stubborn. So I
I'm a
re-
crier.
I refused to cry like my first couple. And then, oh, but yeah, it can, especially if you're receptive and you're in that space and you need to release it. I have broken down, especially when I'm peak flare, because for me, it feels like my muscles are like ripping off my bones. And sometimes just, I wouldn't even get to the part of saying that without just like breaking down. And then
Wait,
I would feel
it
better
feels like that when you're getting acupuncture, or just you mean your flare up makes you feel like
when I get
that?
my,
And then, okay.
my flare ups.
Sorry.
No, acupuncture is actually, I wouldn't say painless because sometimes, the needle itself going in, you can feel it, but relatively, like some points, painless. I one time woke up with my hand stuck too. And
It's so scary.
I was in class and I was like, I can't write, like I don't know what to do, but I was in acupuncture class, so my teacher was like, I got you.
Ah, that's
And just
nice.
like put the needles in and now I can do it myself if I ever needed. And yeah, I would say it's crazy what it can treat. I mean, the spiritual side of it is also insane. It's just so fun.
No, that's awesome. Before we get going today, I wanted to ask you what the most important lesson you've learned in your 20s is and what your number one piece of advice is that you'd like to share with all 20 somethings.
I think the biggest thing the past year that I've been working on, because I've had a lot of revelations. Like I said, I had a good therapist. I'm actually turning 25 next week, and I'm big in the
25 is a very emotional time. I am 25. I'm having all the quarter life crises. Shut up.
right, right. So one of the things that I've really been waking up to is that everybody is their own main character. Like,
It's so good.
like still be respectful of other people, care for other people. I'm not saying like everybody's in their own little worlds and shouldn't think about that, but like if you're anxious, I for the most part, people aren't thinking about you the way that you think they're thinking about you. And that has been so nice
Yeah.
to know and to move through life. It's made me want to care even more for the people in my life,
Yeah.
knowing that I'm their supporting characters and knowing that they're mine instead of just being a supporting character or having to be the main. I think sharing that mindset has been really good for me.
That is the best advice I think I've ever heard. I'm so here for the main character energy. I think I'm the main character, clearly, if you can't tell with my bows.
I love them.
Thank you. But yeah, 100%, you are the main character of your story and treat yourself as such. But do
Hmm.
know that your friends are the main character of their own story. So be there to support them, be there to give love to them, and just hype them up and help them in every way that you can as well.
Yes, 100%.
Well, thank you so much for coming on my podcast. I'm so excited we
Yeah,
had this opportunity to talk.
me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in today. I will add Maddie's social to the show notes if she wants me to. And thank you for tuning in to a 20 something survival guide. Remember, understanding and empathy are the key to supporting those that you love with invisible disabilities and just those around you in general. If you enjoyed this episode today, please make sure to follow the pod on social at Darian Diaries. And if you want to share the message, go ahead and add it to your story and share with your loved ones. Until next time, I'm Darian Alexis, and don't forget to survive and thrive.